first case is presented, as you can see on the slide behind me, by Mr. Dimitrios Psarrakis. And he's from the Brussels Council of Technology and International Development. And the Brussels Council is founded to build international partnerships and bridges that link innovation ecosystems of entrepreneurs and researchers around the world and technological collaboration in an intergovernmental level. Now, their mission is to promote the highest technology and governance standards around the world, ensuring economic growth, economic integrity, and social welfare. Please, warm welcome for Dimitrios Psarrakis. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Let me see. Yes. My name is Dimitrios Psarrakis. I'm originally from Greece. And in the last 8 years, I live with you here in Belgium, working in the European Parliament with the Vice President responsible for innovation of the European Parliament, Eva Kaili. And I was draftsperson of the blockchain resolution of the European Parliament, which was essentially the first piece of work coming out from a European institution, and was actually so well received by everybody that in the very difficult years of 2018, just before Brexit, even Nigel Farage voted in favor of this resolution. We had only one opposing this idea. And 3 or 4 months later, even Congress replicated the approach we adopted in the European Parliament. In the beginning, when I have to encounter this innovation of blockchain, I thought that it was a very dry technological thing that it's expected to be very boring. But on the way, as an economist, I realized that it's a strong economic optimization problem. That is not only economic, it's also very political. My first degree was in international relations back in 2002, 2003. And back in these days, this guy you see over there, an economist of the Johns Hopkins University and the World Bank, Francis Fukuyama, was super famous because he introduced the concept of the end of history. Being a political scientist, end of history for him meant that the Cold War, that back in the years of 1989 was ending, the idea was that the human beings are not able to improve their trust to their institutions because we reached a point that you cannot improve trust using social design. But this was a really interesting point because first, end of history never ends. And second, we can actually improve trust by engineering it. And starting in 1982, some computer scientists and game theorists of MIT start exploring the problem of reaching a consensus between parties that do not trust each other without the need of having a trusted intermediary on board, 1982. This idea was further developed by Scott Stornetta on how to timestamp a document, meaning how we can be sure that everybody in a distributed database have exactly the same thing that everybody agrees when the change appears. And finally, the peer-to-peer payment with eCash by Satoshi Nakamoto, which is the inauguration of blockchain Bitcoin, where you can exchange value without the necessity of having a trusted intermediary in a digital environment. Blockchain is about economic value. What means economic value? Well, every innovation has a similar triangle over there. And the idea here is to expand the value chain, the value space, the triangle between money, the quantity you sell, the cost curve, and the demand by reducing costs and scaling up your operation, your products and services. In the case of blockchain, the economic value comes from the management of transaction costs, verification costs, network costs, coordination costs, monitoring costs, contract enforcement costs, and by reducing all these costs, you make your product or service much more accessible to the demand side, so you scale up by reducing frictions. How blockchain generates value? Through tokenization of value and through organizational settings. I start with this, which is much more interesting and much more sexy, if I may, compared to tokens. Gartner introduced these innovative architectures through blockchain in a continuum where encryption, distribution, immutability, tokenization, and decentralization will enhance business solutions in the coming years, and they put everything in a chronology. I like that this approach identifies the features. However, I don't think that these features should be in a different time frames. This is a constant economic problem that each one of us developing solutions through blockchain should have in their mind. And this is what I mean. It's an economic optimization problem that you have to make two major kinds of decisions: organizational decisions and architectural decisions. When we are talking about organizational decisions, first and foremost, we need to identify something very important. It's not about the technology. It's always about the solution. Sorry for that. It's always about the solution. The problem we usually have, especially in Europe, is that our innovators fall in love with the technology they develop instead of focusing on the solutions they need to provide to the market. So the problem comes first. And the first question you need to ask is, does it make sense to remove the intermediary? Question number two, once you have decided to be part of a network without intermediaries, but with counterparts, how much authority should delegate to this network? And this comes with three major architectural questions. How much computational power to allocate for every node of the network? How many messages should be exchanged between the nodes to ensure synchronization? And how the network will manage the throughput of data? These trade-offs determines the cost efficiency of having a blockchain or not. Oops. Okay. The study I showed you earlier speaks about enhanced blockchains. I drafted a book with the Vice President of the European Parliament, Eva Kaili, where we discussed to which extent an enhanced blockchain can also be complete. It's very difficult to have complete blockchains. First, because blockchains rely on smart contracts, but smart contracts are not smarter than the people who actually drafted them. Contracts remain incomplete in the traditional economic understanding and in the non-traditional emerging blockchain understanding. Ownership behaviors persist in blockchains. Even in a decentralized environment, for example, Bitcoin, people make tribes and they own solutions, and this erodes the sustainability of the system. Consensus in perpetuity is not guaranteed because motives of people change over time. For example, again, in the decentralized environment of Bitcoin, we had 150 to 100 forks, and partisans within the blockchain environment that actually eroded the sustainability and the scalability of the blockchain. Tokenization of value is another very interesting point here. You can use different approaches to tokens. We have here some families of tokens, starting from tokens emerging from decentralized protocols by Bitcoin. You can have stable coins that derive their value of either from a pegging with a fiat currency or with a basket of underlying assets. you can have utility tokens, you can have exchange tokens, payment tokens, you can have 1 million of tokens. But it doesn't matter what is the classification of tokens. Tokens are always digital representations in a cryptographic form, transferred following rules of a consensus mechanism in a decentralized network. And this always, independently of what kind of token you may want to develop, this generates challenges, on-chain, off-chain problems, because the underlying asset is not necessarily on the blockchain, the token is. Many failures of blockchains are because of this asynchrony between on-chain and off-chain. The finality of the transactions is another major problem, when a transaction is concluded. And the different liquidity risks emerge when you treat a token in a decentralized environment, only run by smart contracts, and in a completely different liquidity projections you receive when you trade a token in a centralized exchange. European Union tried to play with blockchain solutions, and of course, the very first part we discussed blockchain is financial implications. European Union introduced a digital finance strategy in 2019, sorry. Then they introduced the DLT pilot regime, which actually consolidates the value chain of the value proposition and the value chain of the financial system, doing something that nobody else other than a European could ever do. Playing with the opportunity of removing from the financial system the clearing houses. This is huge, because clearing houses are a matter of national pride for the 27 member states. It's like taxation. And obviously, saying that you don't need to have clearing houses for settlement and clearing transactions, that in the previous status quo of technology, you needed to have different players to ensure market integrity, was huge. So in 5 years' time, we have this pilot regime. We will explore the possibilities around this, and we see how we can use blockchain to distribute, to change the value chain of the financial system. The other is the very famous markets in crypto assets regulation that effectively provides regulatory framework for stable coins and virtual asset service providers. And finally, we have the transfer of funds regulation on how to transfer value in crypto assets in a safe way without compromising market integrity in terms of anti-money laundering and terrorist financing. Obviously, regulating tokens by putting traditional labels. For example, this token is a security. This token is a payment instrument. This is a utility token. Is a lazy approach to regulation. This lazy approach was the one that actually introduced by the European Union, instead of having a dedicated regulation on tokens. Regulating crypto asset service providers is a plain vanilla story, because here we replicated MiFID for financial market service providers in this case. But the real problem here is how to regulate decentralized entities that exist in 200 different countries around the world without knowing who makes a decision. The modern capitalism was developed in the concept of having an entity. This idea is on the way out. We need to generate new structures of capitalism. Europe is in the forefront of regulating this environment. The old school organization of the world, where America were innovating, Europeans regulating, and Asians copying and a little bit improving, is not working very well after the Trump years. Europe suddenly wants to develop a geopolitical dimension when it comes to digital economy by changing a little bit the map. Europe wants to innovate, to regulate, and he who doesn't copy is in the blacklist. We saw it in the GDPR regulation. We see it now again with the markets in crypto assets regulation. And this is a book that I strongly recommend you all to read. It's from an American law professor from Columbia University, The Brussels Effect, or how European Union rules the world. This is a fantastic way of ruling the world by creating regulatory structures in the digital economy. I told you that it's really challenging to make the transition from the entities-based capitalism to a decentralized, autonomous organization-based capitalism. And this is a way of organizing the economy that appears in the history of capitalism every 200 years. And I want you to go 200 years back, almost 200 years back. This gentleman here is Lord Henry Palmerston, Prime Minister of UK, of England, in these years. He faced a major problem during his career. He lost the Crimean War. This resembles a little bit the days of our time. Back then, the major economic problem of his country is, should we legalize and liberate the formation of limited liability companies? Everybody was afraid of limited liability companies. Adam Smith, the father of economics, was against it. John Stuart Mill, against it. The church, against it. The poor were against it. The rich were against it. The parliament was against it. But Palmerston said, we need to move forward. We need to assume the risk that this new kind of form of company endorses in order to move our economy further. And he legalized limited liability companies, and everybody could form this entity without the need of getting the stamp of the House of Lords. This changed capitalism forever. My question to you is, are we again in a Palmerston moment? Does blockchain leave us in a very new Palmerston moment? And the last, before I leave you to the use cases you work every day, so far we have experienced 3 solid industrial revolutions, and for many people we are entering in a 4th one. In every single industrial revolution, we had a competition between 3 structures: the market, the state, and the community. Communities were very solid back then, and you, vast majority of you are Belgians, you understand how the communities developed fantastic centers of economic growth like in Ghent, Brugge, Brussels. The community was in the core of it because it's a political and economic institutions entailing huge economic properties. However, as we had industrial revolutions, the community always becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. Whereas the markets and the state competing about controlling the means of power and the means of production. First time after 250 years of industrial revolutions, we are reaching a point that the industrial revolution, instead of weakening communities, can empower them again. Edge computing, blockchain, regional tokenization, decentralized cloud, all this can provide to the communities the capability to rebuild and reemerge as a significant pillar in the economy. Because with the erosion of communities, we have the increase of populism. We have the increase of xenophobia, fear between us. Here is a mission for that, and blockchain technology, with its decentralized properties, can accelerate this political economy transition. And here you see my professor, Raghuram Rajan, who wrote this wonderful book, The Third Pillar, which speaks exactly about this topic. And with these words, I would like to think about blockchain and something bigger than the features we develop. It's an economic problem, and it's a political economy problem. And by this, you introduce constantly organizational structures that may improve the quality of life and the quality of politics of our communities in every single stage. Thank you.